Hi, how you doing? I just want to drop a video on the events that are taking place and kind of go over some things that I really think are important. Ultimately, an element of it that was leading to biblical prophecy. Obviously, that's where I usually will post things. I don't just do it to do it. I wait until there's events that actually make sense, that I think are important, and the events that are happening I think are important. So you have the strikes that took place in Yemen. You have the Houthis that are shooting missiles and so forth. But all of this is just a byproduct of what's taking place with the policies of the globalist controlled West. And it's ultimately the globalists that are doing what they're doing. And it's ultimately going to lead to what the Bible talks about. We're eventually going to have a new alliance that will rise to power, and that alliance will be controlled and manipulated by a figure called the Antichrist over a 10 nation coalition alliance that will arise. I think you're going to see the existing coalitions and alliances disintegrate, fall apart in some way, and ultimately you're going to have a 10 nation alliance that's extremely powerful, made up of 10 nations. I believe those are probably going to be the United States, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, most likely, and then 5 other nations associated with that, that will come out of that, and they will ultimately come together and elect one individual, and that one individual would be the Antichrist. Where do I get that from? Revelation chapter 17. I've done videos on it before, so you can watch those, but in the future I'll probably do another one just to follow up on those and put them out there to keep them fresh. But what we see happening right now is just going to lead to Armageddon. Well, it's like anything. It's like, this it takes small rocks ultimately to build a hill, and it takes a lot, build another hill to ultimately lead to other structures and mountains, as it were. Well, that's kind of how we see this. It's a small. It may look like a small event, but I think it's a reaction to events that have laid and paved the way for where we're headed. What ultimately is the destruction of the world system as we know it. But ultimately, the light of that would be is the fact that Christ will return and put it into this wicked system and establish His eternal kingdom, which is, as Christians, we all say Amen. We're all waiting for His return, which is, I think, soon, imminent. When He comes back, ultimately, I believe He's come back early for the church initially, the rapture of the church. I believe that will be a pre-tribulation rapture, but outside of that, you still have the events that are taking place that will lead to the destruction of most people. I mean, if you look around, people say, "Oh, well, we've heard all this before," and what significance does that have to me, have to do with me as an individual? Well, unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand. It's like, the reason why Christians feel it's so urgent to spread the gospel is the fact that we're called to or commanded to, but also the fact that if you get into if we are that final tribulation, besides people just dying and facing judgment, and then you have heaven or hell. Without Christ, obviously you have hell for eternity. That's something we wouldn't wish on anyone. But if you're talking about the entire world going into what we consider the end times, or the final tribulation period of time, the 7-year period of time, roughly, figure, depending on how you do your calculations, roughly 2/3 of the population of the world are going to be killed within 7 years. So yeah, I think that if we think that we're moving in that direction, then it is extremely important for us to talk about these things, because there's a good chance that, say the rapture happens today, and say the tribulation begins thereafter, shortly after, let's say within a year, then you're talking about within that 7 to 8 year period of time, you're talking about 2/3, multitude of billions of people, 6 billion people, roughly thereabouts, being killed within 7 years. So yeah, it's extremely important for of a topic. So the globalist. So that's where I would start. The globalist control it's been developing over a long period of time, belonging to various organizations and so forth. But ultimately, they use the power of finance to control and manipulate politicians, who then control and manipulate its citizens. And that's what I think is happening right now. I mean, they keep talking about, in this whole thing, when you actually look at what's happening with this whole Yemeni attack and so forth, it's all about, well, Israel was number one. Well, Israel was established for a reason. That was because of all the pogroms and murders and basically prejudices against the Jewish people. You had a Christian group of people that had come out of the Reformation, which the Reformation itself was an amazing event. I think one of the most significant events outside of Christ himself, to free us from the power of this corrupt organization called the Catholic Church, who was oppressing people And I know some Catholics wear that and be offended. I'm not trying to offend you. It's just the reality of the truth. You know, the Catholic Church has a different gospel, a different everything. I've done videos on it, and I'll do some in the future. But the Catholic Church has a different gospel, a different salvation, a different Jesus Christ. And, even though they may use the same terminology, their meanings are different. The gospel itself is different. Their authorities are different. Everything about the Catholic Church speaks that it is completely an unbiblical, different organization, even though they claim to have authority to even interpret the Bible, when in fact they basically supersede the Bible with their tradition, and that tradition, which is an unbiblical claim in the first place in their apostolic succession, all that unbiblical claims, has authority over that, and they confuse their Catholic people with the terminology of Christianity. They use the same names. They use a lot of the same names of Christ and so forth that they call upon, but prayers and stuff like that. It sounds very Christian in imagery, but the reality is it's extremely the doctrines itself, their plan of salvation, everything, their authorities and all that stuff. It's completely unbiblical. It's completely diametrically opposed to what the Bible talks about. So anyway, so the church that came out of that is once you had this explosion of the gospel being taught. Well, a lot of that was centered in England. And England, in that process of being part of that Reformation period of time, allowed for the English Bible to spread. Many Christians came out of that, and then ultimately that led to the amazing events of England. They were the preeminent one to basically stop slavery in the Western Hemisphere. Most people don't know that, but that was Christian driven, and that permeated throughout the world. The English Bible, spread the gospel around through missionaries throughout the world. And you're talking about Africa, Central America, South America, all America as they were coming over. America itself, they went on and picked up that mantle, and Christians in America spread the gospel throughout the world. But ultimately, the same thing happened in England. Was they saw the need for the Jewish people to have a homeland, and they saw the biblical mandates in the Bible, and so ultimately came the Balfour Declaration and so forth that came out. It was, hey, we're going to establish after World War I, we're going to establish this Jewish homeland. And in this Balfour Declaration and other things that came out of that, the British Mandate came out of that, and the British Mandate ultimately led to trying to establish Jewish homeland, and the Jewish people ultimately was founded, established. There was also, the British was the predominant power in the world. They had defeated the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had collapsed. The Arab nations around them were all relatively very poor. You didn't have the petroleum explosion that you ultimately had, and the amount of money that went there and went to those nations, those Arab nations. It wasn't there yet. What you had was the British predominant power in the world using the British pound, sterling pound, which was basically the global currency at the time. It was a standard of global currency at the time. And so, you had people who were relatively unemployed. You had migrants everywhere from an old, defunct empire. And then you had this new, the preeminent empire establishing a new homeland for the Jewish people, as it were. Well, you're talking about tens of thousands of jobs that were being created in an area where there was no jobs. There was very little. Poverty was high. You're coming out of the World War I with, destruction everywhere throughout Europe. So there's only a few powers there. America was emerging. England was the preeminent power still. And then you had ultimately them establishing a new homeland. So you're talking about, hundreds of thousands of jobs were being created with the global dominant currency by the dominant empire. And so all these migrants migrated to what is today Israel, and they were Arabs, and they started calling themselves, ultimately they called themselves Palestinians, which really was coined by what's attributed to Yasser Arafat in 1960. So much later, because of his claim. Well, the Arabs obviously were using about so-called Palestinians, which were just Arab migrants, to basically be a thorn in the side of these people that they perceived as an enemy of Israel. And so and that was mostly motivated by their Islamic faith. Let's just be honest about it. Well, that brings us to today. And Yemen's the same thing. They're motivated by their Islamic faith. And that's why they cling to the so-called Palestinian cause, while they basically don't do anything for the Palestinians. They've given very little, if anything, to the Palestinian people in reality. while the West primarily has been the one who's given money to these so-called Palestinians, billions of dollars, demand a two-state solution on Israel, when in fact everybody knows, number one, there is no such thing as Palestinians, that they're just migrant Arabs, and that they should be basically relocated somewhere else, and that would create an environment for Israel to flourish, without all the hostilities and murder and death and everything else. But they keep demanding that Israel just tolerate that and live with it and so forth. With no city or state would do that. But because of the influences of the West and the globalists, that's what they do. They use it as a tool to basically create hostility and confusion, so they can manipulate other countries and control those politicians and so forth, to do their bidding, their will, and ultimately to enact their globalist agenda, which is ultimately global government. That's ultimately what they're pushing for. So you have global government and global entities that are basically presiding over nation states, governments, through the manipulation of people by the money that they give to them through their various organizations that they finance. And that's why we see what's happening right now with the Houthis attacking shipping. Why? Why are they doing it besides the Israeli thing? Because we have to keep those shipping lanes open. You keep hearing it all the time on the news. We got to keep those shipping lanes open. And it's like, well, no, you really don't, unless you are someone who is a person who believes in global trade, which has been detrimental to all the nation states. I mean, you look at the UK, you look at Europe, most European nations, you look at America, you look at Canada, and so forth. Global trade hasn't helped really any of those states. Not really. Very few, very little. It mostly has moved your jobs to these countries that are controlled, mostly communist countries like China and Vietnam and so forth, where people are there's no protection for their citizens. They basically are paid nothing. They live terrible lives. In general, they're very impoverished, and there's nobody there to protect them. They can't speak up to their government without going to some gulag or prison or being killed. Very little they can say. It's like you do what they say. Well, in the West, you have more laws and more protections. Well, the globalists don't like that. They don't want globalist protections. They want oppression, control, manipulation, power. They love that communist system of government. It seems like they see themselves as being the ultimate globalist leaders that control this entire world system. They don't believe that it should be, everybody should have a fair share in this. It's just the opposite. It's like they want to control everything, and that's why they support more oppressive rights. And that's why you see in the West, the countries are increasingly becoming more oppressive. Your freedom of speech is being manipulated and controlled, and they do it mostly through corporations, like YouTube, for instance. YouTube is one. You make comments in the comment section. It's just your comment. It's not hurting anybody or anything like that. You're putting your opinion out there, and you'll find often if you speak about anything that's globalist or anything like that, it will be censored. It will be completely removed. And if they put you on that list of removed, you can post things all day long. But if you go back and look at them, and you get in the habit of doing that, which I've done, by the way, you'll find that what you've posted has been completely removed. And there's no recourse. It's not like you can say, hey, what's going on here? You can't do this. I'm going to sue you, blah, blah, blah. It's a private organization. The government says, you can kind of do whatever you want. But to Hollywood, they say, you put whatever you want out there. You can say whatever you want. It's no problem, because we don't want to infringe on your right of freedom of speech. But these private organizations, which they use, it's globalist control. You're talking about Google, and just a few companies control a massive amount of all the media out there and platforms. There's very few. That's why they hate, I think, Elon Musk and Twitter. Because they can't control it. At least it doesn't seem like it, but maybe they are. Who knows? But it doesn't seem like it. But they certainly control everything else. There's many times where I've posted, I go back and I look and see what's said, and I'm not saying anything racist or hateful or anything like that. But you should be able to post an opinion. You should be able to say something. If I disagree with whatever, let's take a topic, transgenderism or homosexuality or whatever, or euthanasia or abortion, I should clearly be able to cite my opinion on that, just like I could if I should have the right to cite my opinion on what I believe about Christianity. I believe the Catholic Church is wrong. I believe the Mormon Church is wrong. I believe the Jehovah's Witness Church is wrong. I believe Islam is completely false, and wrong. But I should have that opinion to say that, and we, in a free society, we should be able to say those things. In Europe, in America, in UK, in Canada, you should be able to say those, but you can't. Why? Because the nation states are using these private institutions and in some cases the nation state itself, to oppress those rights and continue to oppress them over and over again, to the point where now they're really systematically using that power where they go in and literally shut people down. And in America, they're doing it, through corporations. Well, hey, we didn't do it. You're the government. You're who we're trusting to protect us, and you're not. You're not protecting us from these. You could go in and censor these companies who do that and fine them for what they're doing, but you don't do it. Instead, you allow them to censor people's opinion because they're being controlled and manipulated by the people they put in position, so that they can't say those things. They can't get that out there. They can't spread this their opinions that would be detrimental to the globalist agenda, which is out there, and it's very dangerous. And what it's leading to is ultimately will be the oppression, subjugation of the world. And like I said, I believe that a select few are controlling it, but they think that they're the masters when in fact they're being controlled and manipulated by ultimately, I believe Satan. Satan is that puppet master that is controlling and manipulating them, and ultimately when his minion, the Antichrist, comes into power, it's going to be too late for them to finally realize that, I think, and they'll realize how much how sorry they are for what they've done. The establishment platform they've given to this person who's going to destroy most of the population of this world. So, but yeah, you have a chance. I mean, many times on YouTube, you post something. Take the Houthi event right now. I've posted things on that. Go back and look to see if those things are there. And I know it's not that one person who's blocking it. It's YouTube itself, because it's done on several platforms. I purposely do it that way so I can go back and check those, and you'll see that it's blocked on every single one of them. And then if you go check your comments, it's completely absent, removed. You can't even look up those comments on any of those sites across the spectrum. I mean, you posted on numerous ones, numerous news agencies. You should be able to post your opinion on those news agencies. Why are you blocking it? If it's not promoting anything that's hateful or mean or unkind, you're simply giving your opinion on the events that are taking place and where that's leading and why it's leading there. You should be able to do that, but yet YouTube blocks those and censors those. I've directly had that done. I had it done today. I went and checked on some stuff I posted, which kind of gave me this idea about posting this video. I'm like, okay, well, we should be able to put a video out there that says what they're doing, and it's clearly censorship, and the people think that what they're doing may be right, but the reality is they're destroying their own freedom, and they're ultimately going to send their own children, their own kids, their own people into a state of basically clearly being oppressed to the point where they're going to be subjugated to authority that just like in this case, you really have no recourse. It's not like I can go to YouTube and say, hey, I got a problem here, man. You guys are censoring me. It's like, your message goes to some guy in India, you're just not even going to get a reply. It's like, and nothing's going to happen. And they know that until the government, who has the power, who we even trusted with that authority and that power, steps in and says, hey, you can't do this, and there's going to be a heavy penalty for what you're doing. And in fact, we can demand, just like Obama went to GM and demanded that guys were fired. The government could step in and demand that certain people at Google or YouTube are fired. They could do that, if they wanted to. They got the power to shut them down. They could literally shut it down and remove their license if they wanted to. I guarantee you that would change. That whole thing they're doing with people and stifling, because the people they stifle, you're getting one side of the voice. You're primarily getting a leftist globalist worldview. It's either leftist, globalist, humanist, something like that, secular humanist type of worldview. You're never getting a Christian conservative worldview. Very seldom you're going to actually get that opinion. Unless it slips through somehow. Most of the time, it's completely being washed by their censorship organization. That's overseeing it. Whatever however they've set up their system to basically block what people say. And these aren't voices of hatred or meanness. It's simply bringing out the fact that you have institutions that are controlling and manipulating elements of the government, and they're doing it through corporations. If you say anything, and it could be, there's nothing that I'm saying that is hateful or mean, and it's completely many times censored. How many times I've had it completely censored, and I'm not saying anything that is mean or unkind. And a lot of people can agree with me. If you write anything about certain groups, it will be censored, even if what you're saying isn't mean or unkind. That's just, you can just give your opinion on what you believe is to be the truth, and there's certain groups can say whatever they want, while you have to abbreviate what you write in the text to basically get around the censorships, which is, to me is crazy. There's no way I should have to do that. Another group can say whatever they want no matter how vulgar and terrible it is. I mean, they come out and say Christianity's false, the Bible's false, you know, Jesus is God. You know, they can say all kinds of horrible things. But if you write something just simply addressing their points, you will be censored. They won't. That happens all the time on YouTube. It happens all the time throughout really the internet in general, on many platforms. So it shows you that you have a controlled world system that's being controlled by very few select people who's using their monetary funds to do so, and they're controlling the commerce of the world. And that's why when you get into this whole battle that's taking place with Houthis and all that stuff, people forget we don't need the navies bombing Yemen. We don't need the navies to go and keep the shipping lanes open, because keeping those shipping lanes open hasn't really, it only helps the globalists and the people that are in global trade. That's all it helps. Small countries and stuff, if you don't have all that, guess what? A lot of that production would come back to you domestically. You would start producing things domestically in your country if you weren't so dependent upon cheap goods coming from overseas. So we don't need your navies, your young men and women going out there on these ships, endangering their lives to make more money for the globalists and the multinational corporations and the few people that control it, and the international globalist bankers and the people that are situated in the UN. You don't need your child, to go fight and die for that. And you don't need to be bombing other countries to do that. So when they're telling you that these shipping lanes have to be retained open, no, they don't. They really don't. The reality is much of that can be done domestically, and it can be done through intertrade between the nations that are in the free societies, supposedly free societies. That's quickly going away, eroding. Ultimately, I believe that erosion is going to happen much sooner, much faster. I think the alliances that are happening right now are going to fall apart. And I believe that, including NATO, I think NATO will probably fall apart. I think the fact that, what Russia's doing in Ukraine and what's happening in Israel and so forth, ultimately is going to lead to what the Bible talks about in the Magog war of Ezekiel 38-39, and many other things that I think are soon on the horizon. 2024 may be that year when some very interesting things happen, but what we should expect to see ultimately is a rise of a 10-nation alliance, which means the existing alliances have to be done away. A new currency that will be global in scope, ultimately leading to the Antichrist, what we call the beast, mark of the beast, which means the existing economic system has to go away. And we see that happening with the dollar right now. You see the dollar quickly fading because of various means. There's many things in work right now. You got BRICS, you got other things that are happening, basically undermining. You got $34+ trillion in debt that was created ultimately for no reason. I mean, the government didn't need to do that, but they did. So you're going to see the demise of the dollar, the disintegration of America's influences while we're seeing the things happen right now. And then you see these select few nations creating new alliances. And primarily right now, what I was talking about is Iran, Turkey, and Russia, and their invasion of Israel. That is on the horizon. That is coming. Make no mistake about it. That's happening very soon. The Bible tells us very specifically that's going to happen. Many Christians have talked about it many times. I've done videos on it, but the Gog-Magog war is coming. Those are the three antagonists, main antagonists. There's others, but those are the main three. And you're going to see that alliance will come against Israel. And I believe ultimately that whatever Western power that is will ultimately most likely be that sword spoken of that will be raised against them. So you get into Ezekiel 38 and 39, he goes to it and it says that, and he names these various groups, basically Russia, Turkey, and Iran is the primary antagonist, using their ancient names. And then they basically will come down in the last days. Now notice that it does go on and say that it will be in the last days. And they will come out of the remote part of Russia being the remotest part of the north, extreme far north. In chapter 39, it talks about that. But ultimately, it talks about this sword in 38, verse 21. It says, I will call for a sword against him, in all my mountains, declares the Lord God. Every man's sword will be against his brother. Well, ultimately, they're talking about fratricide. They will turn against each other, but it also means that this sword that he's going to call will have to be a massive sword that's going to stand up against this coalition, this multinational coalition. It's going to be extremely powerful between Russia, Turkey, and Iran, and other nations. going to be fairly massive alliance that won't trust each other. I mean, if you have those groups together today, I don't think Turkey is going to be fully trusting of Russia. You know, they fought multiple wars with each other. Turkey's the NATO ally, but if NATO falls apart, Turkey's no longer part of NATO at that point. They're going to look for their own new alliance, and I think their natural one that they've been building for the last, definitely since Erdogan's been in office, is with Russia and Iran. They've definitely built a strong alliance with them. Their currency, the lira, is basically fallen apart. Russia's ruble is not in good shape. Iran not in good shape economically for all the sanctions and everything that's going on there, and they even moved away from SWIFT. How they pay internationally and just trying to do it through their local banks and their local currencies. That's the movement. And ultimately, the globalists aren't going to sit there and allow for that to continue. They have a goal and have an agenda. And there's this dominance and control of the world, and ultimately a global control. So I think what's going to happen is NATO will break apart. That forces them to create a new alliance, and that new alliance ultimately will be drawn into this war that the Bible talks about. And it says, he goes on to say, it is in the last days that he's going to call them down. That's a very important part of this. He says that in the latter years, you will come into the land and that has been restored from the sword, whose inhabitants have been gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which have been a continual waste. Exactly what Israel was. I mean, if you look at early pictures, Israel, the current state of Israel, before the reestablishment of the nation of Israel and the Jewish people, it looked like continual waste. It was just terrible. It was like there was nothing there. Nobody would want to live there. It was just basically swamps and desert. And when Israel reemerged, they start to drain the swamps. They start to build agriculture. They start to build cities. They developed it into what it is today, a flourishing, beautiful country. And now it's the envy of the Middle East. And but that was, again, a gathering of all the people from among the nations. Exactly what the Bible said is going to happen has happened. But the key part of that is that it is in the latter years. So when you read that in verse 8 of chapter 38, that's a significant thing to take note of. It's in the latter years. And he goes on to say that it's that it would be in the end times. I think we're seeing that. I think we're seeing that development of nations that are going to be antagonistic. I think the events that are leading up to it, with the instability in the world, the instability of the economic system, the current one, they're trying to usher this in. I think even the globalists are being manipulated, and God obviously understands, Satan's ploys and plans, and Satan, he has his plans as well. He realizes what's taking place. He realizes he can't win, but he's doing his role. His role is being played out as well. And he's not trying to rush the end times. Nobody rushes to go off to prison. He realizes that his days are numbered, and that's why when he's cast down to earth, he's filled with rage, as it talks about in chapter 12 of Revelation. He's filled with rage. Why? Because he doesn't want the end times to happen, because that means he realizes he's going to be locked away for 1,000 years, and then ultimately released for a short time, and then destruction. His ultimately going to be cast into the lake of fire for eternity. Nobody wants that in there. Nobody would rush into that, and Satan doesn't want that either. But he realizes that God's in control. He isn't. And that God will do things according to his plan and his word, and events that are happening right now are happening for a reason. And I think we're headed in that direction. I think we're headed in a direction where, the end is certain and it's near. But at the dawn after that will be the return of Christ and establishment of his eternal kingdom, which is very beautiful. And that's why we say, just like it says in Revelation at the end, it says, come Lord Jesus, come. So that's what we pray, please return, Lord, and establish your eternal kingdom. So all this bad stuff that's happening, don't let it bother you if you're a Christian. But if you're not a Christian, I would say repent of your sins, put your faith in Jesus Christ, trust in him, and seek after his righteousness and truth, and ask for his forgiveness, and put your trust and faith in Jesus Christ. Anyway, God bless you. Be safe. Keep looking up. I think with the things that are happening in Yemen and so forth, don't be troubled. There's wars and rumors of wars. But these are simply birth pangs leading to a greater event. God bless you. We'll see you.